Hello viewers, in today's lecture we will discuss about the population and issues of aged population. Whatever the circumstances of older people, all are entitled to live in an environment that enhances their capabilities. Today, for the first time in history, most people can expect to live into their 60s and beyond. These changes are dramatic. These extra years of life and demographic shifts have profound implications for each of us as well as for the societies we live in. The concept of aging. Population aging refers to shifts in the age distribution of the population in which the relative share of persons at older age increases and the share at younger age decreases. This proportional redistribution is distinct from absolute increase in the number of older persons that can occur even if their share does not increase. These changes that constitute and influence aging are complex. At a biological level, aging is associated with the gradual accumulation of a wide variety of molecular and cellular damage. Over time, this damage leads to a gradual decrease in physiological reserves, an increased risk of many diseases, and a general decline in the capacity of the individual. Ultimately, it will result into death. Beyond these biological losses, older age frequently involves other significant changes. These include the shifts in roles and social positions and the need to deal with loss of close relationships. In developing a public health response to aging, it is thus important not just to consider approaches that ameliorate the losses associated with older age, but also those that reinforce recovery, adaptation, and psychological growth. The table shows the trends in the percentage of population 60 years and older from 1950 to 2000 across world and different regions. For world, this percentage increased from 8 to 10% across this period. This percentage also increased for less developed regions from 6.4 to 7.7%. The percentage of old people remained consistent for Africa but has increased from 6.7 to 8.8 in Asia. Latin America and Caribbean also showed an increase in this percentage. Global aging trends. The number of older persons has tripled over the last 50 years and will more than triple again over the next 50 years. In 1950, there were 205 million persons aged 60 or over throughout the world. At that time, only 3 countries had more than 10 million people who were 60 or older, that is China 42 million, India 20 million and United States of America 20 million. 50 years later, the number of persons aged 60 or over increased about 3 times to 606 million. In 2000, the number of countries with more than 10 million people aged 60 or over increased to 12, including 5 with more than 20 million older people. Over the first half of the current century, the global population 60 or over is projected to expand by more than 3 times to reach nearly 2 billion in 2050. The older population is growing faster than the total population in practically all regions of the world, and the differences in growth rates are increasing. More developed regions have relatively high proportions of older persons. The more developed countries are in general in a more advanced stage of demographic transition. The proportions of older persons there are projected to remain significantly higher than the proportions in the less developed regions. Although the regional differences in the percentage of older people are expected to decrease over the next 50 years, the difference will remain large through mid-century. By 2050, 1 in every 3 persons living in more developed regions is likely to be 60 or older, and about 1 in every 4 is projected to be 65 or older. In less developed regions, nearly 1 in every 5 is projected to be over 60, while 1 in every 7 is projected to be over 65. In the less developed regions, the population age 60 or over increased at the rate of 3.7% annually in the period 2010 to 2015 and is projected to increase by 2.9% annually before 2050 and 0.9% annually between 2050 and 2100. Its numbers is expected to rise from 554 million in 2013 to 1.6 billion in 2050. By 2050, their proportion of older persons is projected to reach 19%. After 2050, population aging in less developed regions will continue but at a slower pace. It is also expected that there will be a rapid increase in the persons aged 80 years from 63 million in 2013 to 268 million in 2050. The old age dependency burden started to increase from mid-90s onwards for Latin America, Caribbean and Asia. The major change anticipated for the more developed regions is the transfer of population from working ages to ages 65 and over. The old age dependency ratio will almost double, increasing from 22.6 persons aged 65 and over per 100 persons of working age in 2005 to an expected value of 44.4 in 2050. In 1950, the median age of the more developed nations was only 29 years, but it is projected to increase more than 45 years by 2050. Europe, which had already reached a median age of 39 years in 2005, is expected to increase to 47.1 years in 2050. The diagram 1 shows the trends in the number of old people. The yellow color depicts the trends for developed nations and blue color indicates the trends for developing nations. These are the projections till 2050. The number of old is seen to be increasing rapidly in developing regions. For the developed nations, the share is proportionately smaller, though the numbers are increasing there as well. In 1950, the number of old people is almost same in developed and developing nations. The gap becomes evident in coming years, where the number of old is seen to consistently rise in the developing regions. Challenges of aged population. Population aging generates many challenges and sparks concerns about the pace of future economic growth, the operation and financial integrity of health, care and pension systems, and the well-being of the elderly. Decline in the labor force participation among elderly. Older people today are significantly less likely to participate in the labor force than they were in the past. Over the past 50 years, labor force participation of persons aged 65 or over declined by more than 40% at the global level. In 1950, about 1 in every 3 persons aged 65 or over was in the labor force. In 2000, this ratio decreased to just less than 1 in 5. Economic prosperity depends crucially on the size and quality of the workforce. As people pass through their 50s and beyond, their likelihood of participating in the labor force tends to decrease. The stock of assets could also decrease as the elderly increasingly rely on their savings to finance their spending. The combination of possible labor market tightening and this saving raises concerns that the steeply aging countries will slow economic growth. Some countries may even face the shrinkage of their economies. Illiteracy. Although illiteracy among older persons has consistently declined, in most of the developed regions. Over the last 2 decades, it still remains generally high. In 1980, the illiteracy rate among women aged 60 or more was 22 percentage points higher than among men at the same age. By 2000, this difference increased to 28 percentage points as the aggregate rate decreased to 69% among older women and 41% among older men. Decline in working age population. A rapidly aging population means there are fewer working age people in the economy. This leads to a supply shortage of qualified workers, making it more difficult for businesses to fill in demand roles. An economy that cannot fill in demand occupation faces adverse consequences including declining productivity, higher labor cost, delayed business expansion, and reduced international competitiveness. In some instances, a supply shortage may push up wages, thereby causing wage inflation and creating a vicious cycle of price-wage spiral. Increase in healthcare costs. Given that demand for healthcare rises with age, countries with rapidly aging populations must allocate more money and resources to their healthcare systems. With healthcare spending as a share of gross domestic product already high in most advanced economies, it is difficult to increase spending while ensuring care improves and other social needs do not deteriorate in the case of publicly funded or government administered healthcare systems. Increase in dependency ratio. Countries with large elderly populations depend on smaller pools of workers in which to collect taxes to pay for higher health costs, pension benefits, and other publicly funded programs. This is becoming more common in advanced economies where retirees live on fixed incomes with much smaller tax brackets than workers. The combination of lower tax revenue and higher spending commitments on healthcare, pension, and other benefits is a major concern for advanced industrialized nations. Undesirable changes to the economy. An economy with a significant share of seniors and retirees has different demand drivers than an economy with a higher birth rate and larger working age population. For example, rapidly aging populations tend to have greater demands for healthcare services and retirement homes. Although this is not necessarily negative, economies may face challenges transitioning to markets that are increasingly driven by goods and services linked to older people. Non-communicable diseases. Population aging also signals the advent of tremendous challenge of a tidal wave of non-communicable diseases. NCDs are currently responsible for roughly 60% of all deaths and nearly half of the loss of actual and effective life years due to disability and death. They range from a significant to a dominant cause of disability and death in high and low income countries, in every world region, and among people who are classified as old and not old. The most important NCDs are cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, and chronic respiratory disease. Financial issues. In recent decades, much attention has been given to the potential effect of population aging on asset prices. Specifically, there have been concerns that asset prices will fall as the elderly sell off their assets. Some analysts predicted asset meltdowns in housing markets due to decreased demand from aging members of the post-World War II baby boom generations. Methods to overcome challenges. Need to modify business practices. To adapt and possibly benefit from an increasingly aged world, businesses must shift organizational structures and practices. As a start, attitudes need to change. Older workers are sometimes seen as a burden with younger candidates preferred in recruitment decisions. But in an economy where knowledge rules, the experience of older workers grows in values and they serve as role models for younger workers. Stretching the workforce and working hours. Policymakers have to focus on raising the participation rates of women and older people. The instruments to achieve a higher participation rate of the young seniors are manifold. Among them, the most important are to correct the inducement of early payments, extensive job dismissal protection, as well as seniority principles. In addition, implementing new child minding arrangements must raise the participation rate for women, and working times could also be increased. Fewer workers have to work more hours in order to compensate for the negative demographic effect and potential growth. This implies, among other things, a higher share of women in the workplace or greater numbers in part-time jobs switching over to full-time positions. This also requires an increase in collectively agreed weekly working times. Migration will help but will not reverse the shift. Economies with a shrinking and aging population obviously need selective migration and thus a sensible immigration policy. Immigration cannot reverse the unfavorable demographic shift, at least not within reasonable socially acceptable parameters. Immigration can, however, help to slow down the process of aging and shrinking of the population and mitigate its negative economic consequences. The younger, more flexible and better qualified the immigrants, the more favorable the outcome would be. Migration policy should not stop at identifying suitable immigrants, but should also help them integrate well into society. It is of great importance for the host countries to promote harmonious relations, making up for a decrease in quantity by an increase in quality. The economic success of a country and the creativity and productivity of its citizens are only partly a question of population size and age. More important are their knowledge and skills as well as their work ethic. The decisive step will be to shorten the duration of school education and to increase competition between education institutions. Universities should be granted autonomy in matters of personnel and fees, promoting lifelong learning, mobility and flexibility. School education will no longer suffice as the vocational preparation for one's whole life. Students and workers have to understand that their education and training are their most important investment in life and much bigger than a car or a flat, which will keep them employable in an ever faster changing environment. Lifelong learning is no longer a choice but a must for workers of the future. However, the onus is not only on workers. Management principles and systems have to change too. Redesigning work, retirement and pensions. It is important to disentangle incentives for leaving the workforce as well as to ensure a closer alignment between public and private pension programs. For many developing nations that are now designing pension programs that have public as well as private components, there are opportunities to learn from more developed nations' experiences. Improved transfer system. The well-being of older persons often depends on intricate systems of pecuniary and non-pecuniary transfers associated with individual savings, family behavior, and as in the case of many social security systems, transfers from current workers to retired persons. Although considerable progress has been made in understanding these transfer systems, gaps in our understanding remain. Particularly in the need of study are interrelationships across systems and a clearer picture of how changes in one system, such as public pensions, affect others. Health reforms. The health of elderly populations is a crucial issue, and influences outcomes in all of the other policy areas affected by aging. Evidence shows that disability is declining across countries, which would suggest that more elderly people are leading longer and healthier lives. While all countries must address the changing health needs of older citizens, the diversity of national healthcare systems points to the value of comparable cross-national data on healthcare quality and outcomes which to date have largely been lacking. Conclusion. Several areas in the community will benefit from the surge in numbers of retirees who are active and healthy, independent and with time on their hands. They play an important role in supporting and maintaining informal social networks, thus binding communities and families within communities. Far from being net receivers of health and support, older people are in fact net providers, at least up to the age of 75 years. They provide childcare, financial, practical and emotional support to family, including helping people outside the household with the tasks of daily living. This is all for today's lecture. Thank you. Next time we will meet again to discuss another interesting topic. Till then, goodbye. Take care.